Welcome to TLC The Light Conversations, a chat show featuring interviews with experts in well-being and creativity. This is series 3, Gems and Keys. The gems are the guests, and the keys are the golden nuggets of wisdom that they share with us through these interviews. I'm your host, Giada Del Drago, aka Yo Giada. Today's guest is Jorge Ferrer, PhD, a clinical psychologist, author, and relationship counselor. He currently serves as research faculty at the California Institute for Human Science, San Diego, and was a professor of psychology for more than 20 years at California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco, where he also served as chair of the Department of East-West Psychology. Among other books, Jorge is the author of Love and Freedom, Transcending Monogamy and Polyamory, and Novogamy, más allá de la monogamia y del poliamor, considered one of the main architects of contemporary transpersonal psychology. His writings on alternative relationships have appeared in journals such as Sexuality and Culture and Psychology and Sexuality. Dr. Ferrer coined the term Novogamy, i.e., relationship styles beyond the monopoly binary, which was the focus of his 2022 TED Talk, Free Your Love, Beyond Monogamy and Polyamory, and was included in Springer's Encyclopedia of Sexual Psychology and Behavior. In his international private practice, he offers professional counseling to individuals and couples focused on the management of jealousy, infidelities, sexual incompatibilities, open relationships, and the design of more satisfying intimate relationships. Jorge was also an advisor to the Religions for Peace organization at the United Nations. So today's guest, Jorge Ferrer, welcome. Welcome to the Light Conversations. It's so wonderful to have you on as a guest.
Thank you very much, Giada. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm right now in the island of Ibiza in Spain.
Oh, beautiful. So I've prepared my my new method of questioning for this podcast is where everything's written down on a card, and I draw cards that have been based on research that I've done on your areas of expertise, and it'll be a bit random. So if you're willing to go with the flow in that way, I will pull my first card for you. Is that okay?
Happy to go with the flow, Giada.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so the first card is good one. Creative relationships. This is the topic of our podcast, so it's a great one to start with. How to design a creative relationship when dating, when in a new relationship, or if wanting to improve a long-term relationship.
Well, there is no direct formula for that, of course, because but the most important thing is that the person involved or the persons involved in trying to create a new relationship, they really become really clear about their needs for relational needs. And from that foundation, then they start kind of like having conversations, clear conversations, honest conversations, vulnerable conversations about what they really want and need in their relationships. That's super important. Otherwise, like people are just kind of like trying to build something without like a foundation, so to speak. So from that foundation, another super important thing, this really depends if you are with someone and you are co-creating a relationship. Therefore, then you need to also not to only be kind of opening to your own needs, but also be, of course, particularly empathic and understanding of your partner's needs. And of course, there are many cases in which compromises can be made. In other cases, they cannot be made. And then is when like sometimes a couple counselor can come in, or sometimes there is places in which there is like an impasse in which like people's needs don't match. And then is when like a process of conscious separation or something like this can start. but connection, awareness of one's own needs, and the capability to articulate them clearly are foundational.
That's really interesting. So the word I heard you say several times there was needs. That requires some awareness. If each person needs to know what they need, and maybe you could talk a bit about needs. What are healthy needs versus needy needs?
That's a tricky one as well, no?
And where do they
Yeah, that's a
where do
tricky one.
needs
One.
come from?
Yes, I would say that like a healthy need is a need that uh, pulls one person to actualize their potential, pulls one person to really like becoming who they really want to be, who they really are supposed to be. Like I believe that we all come into the world with certain potentials, and then certain needs are like pulling us in that direction. No, Abraham Maslow talked about meta needs as well, like. Needs that are beyond survival, beyond belonging, and talk about self-actualization. So self-actualizing needs are the kind of the needs I have in mind with healthy needs. And of course, there is also healing needs. And this is the tricky thing because healing needs are between healthy and unhealthy, quotation marks, a scary mark here, in the sense that like some people with certain kind of like childhood traumatic experiences, for example, they may have like certain needs that are required for their healing. But that doesn't mean that they are like needs that they will always have. Maybe once they do the kind of healing, they may have like different kind of needs. So it's important to realize that needs can be evolving according to your own kind of like a healing and developmental process. They can be fluid as well as so many other things connected to sexuality, relationships, and ourselves.
That is really interesting. You brought up self actualization in there. Can you tell me what that means to
Yes,
you? I have an idea of what it means.
self-actualization. Self-actualization is the term coined by Abraham Maslow, who was the founder of both humanistic and transpersonal psychology. And with that, he meant he did like a whole study on like human motivation. And then he says, like, after people meet their survival needs, their needs for belonging, their needs for security, all these basic needs that we all have, then he realized that people when they have different kind of needs like need for beauty, needs for transcendence, need for harmony, and need for becoming the best version of themselves. That in a nutshell I would say are like needs for self-actualization, to actualize one's own potential, to become the full flower that we can become.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that actually, for designing creative relationships, people need to be aware of their needs and their needs that are about becoming the best version of themselves. Is that right? Did I get it?
I would say that that's like a foundational as well, in the sense that there's a huge difference. It's like, I'm a counselor too. I see a lot of couples and individuals, and mostly with dealing with these topics about relationships. And there's a huge difference when the two people in a couple are invested not only in the relationship and in having a good life, but in their own self growth, in their own self actualization. Huge difference. With one of them is and the other is not, there's always like a block, there's always an impasse, there's always something that is going to be much harder to really move forward the relationship towards harmony or a constructive constellation. But when both of them are really invested not only in their own self-gratification, their own kind of pleasure, their own feeling good, but something beyond themselves, right? Then and that's something beyond themselves who can be very well who they can become, like their best version of themselves. Then things change dramatically because people are much more willing to make compromises. They're more willing to take risks. They're more willing to go beyond their comfort zone.
Ah, okay, cool. Thank you for giving an outline of creative relationships. I'm pulling the next card here,
Okay.
and it is Novogamy. Novogamy. This is a term that you coined in your book on transcending monogamy and polyamory. Please explain polyamory and novogamy and who it may suit and what are the pros and cons.
Okay, well, the paradigm that we have always been born into, like the water as fishes, we are, swimming in this society, in this culture, is the paradigm of monogamy, either long-term monogamy, long life, till death pull us apart, or serial monogamy. I go from one relationship to the other. Right. So the polyamory relation paradigm that emerged like. I would say like in the 70s and 80s in California, and now it's quite spread into the world, is like a paradigm that affirms like the possibility to maintain more than one romantic or even sexual relationship simultaneously. And that can take different forms. I can have a primary relationship and then other lovers, or I can have like different relationship at the same level, what is called hierarchical and non-hierarchical forms of polyamory. Okay, so today it sounds like for most people they have to choose. And today in many like more liberal environments like Ibiza, like the Bay Area of San Francisco, like even Barcelona, like in many big cities, like when people come together, they already ask these questions: Are you monogamous or polyamorous? Right? And that's a question that
Really? People ask those
yes,
questions?
yes.
That's dating in conscious communities is like, what are you into? What kind of relationship are you into? Interesting.
Uh, yes, yeah, polyamory has reached the masses like through different TV programs and different movies, like Big Christina Barcelona of Woody Allen. It's kind of out there, many articles in the Atlantic and everywhere, So now it's something in the field, so to speak. So that's a question like I personally start finding kind of repressive or oppressive actually. Because, for example, in my own life, like I went through different cycles of polyamory and monogamy. So when people would ask me this question, I would say, well, it really depends on what developmental moment you are. It really depends with who you are. It really depends on many other factors. So Novogamy is a way to break beyond that binary in the same way that the transgender movement like invited us to think beyond the binary of being male and female. Transgender individuals taught us that you can be somewhere in between, both at the same time, or even beyond being male or female. So in that same way, it's not only monogamy is not only developmental. Okay, different moments of my life could be also geographical. I know many couples who are like monogamous at home, but for example, when they go to festivals like Burning Man in Nevada or Boom Festival in Portugal, they become polyamorous. And right, and also there is also a question of self-honesty and self-discovery. Like many people, what part of ourselves is more monogamous or more polyamorous? I know many people who are monogamous on a mental level. They believe in monogamy and even in their hearts, but sexually, actually, they do desire a variety of lovers, and vice versa. I know some people that they believe in polyamory, and they think this like many feminist authors. I believe in polyamory because transgress the patriarchal model of women's possession and all that, blah blah. But when they find themselves that they just want or can only be sexual with one person. So monogamy or polyamory, are you mono or poly? Depends on when in your life you are asked that question. Depending on where you are, depends on what part of yourself you ask that question. And there are many other examples, but I don't want to go further here. Maybe you can have some comment here or some further question to make it more focused or interesting for your audience.
Yeah, thank you very much for explaining that. And it sounds like what you're encouraging is people to explore where they're at in a specific moment in time, in a specific relationship, and not stick to some rigid box that's like, this is what I am, this is who I am, but that it can change depending on where you're at in life and who you're with. And maybe that's quite controversial because people seem to like putting themselves and other people into boxes in life so they can be like, oh, you're this type of person, or you're this way inclined. But you're saying like, get rid of the binary and just be who you are moment to moment. And that sounds like it requires a lot of open communication because you're going to have to do a lot of dialogue around where you're at every step of the
Yes.
way.
Yes. So I wanted to add like an important qualification here in this about like being monogamous and polyamorous as being very fluid categories. In the same way that with gender, the same way with sexual orientation, there always be many people who are more mono and more poly, or more heterosexual and more homosexual, for example, and that's also important to honor. That's very important to honor. So it's not, but the point and what we're witnessing today, in the same way with gender, is that with relational fluidity, as I call it, like an increasing number of people, even people sometimes that have never thought to go into open relationships, are considering to do that. There was like some research in the States some years ago, like done on what the journal is called post-patriarchal couples, couples who are trying to do things differently. And many of these post-patriarchal couples, after many years of being together, they love each other, they want them to be together. But for example, sexuality is not what it used to be. Sexual habituation had kicked in, and then they were giving each other some free passes, when they were traveling, going to conferences on their own, and they would say that that would help them actually to be together. But again, this is not for everybody. This is very important. I don't believe that polyamory, monogamy, or novogamy, whatever it is, in my own understanding, it's the way to go for everybody, or there is always higher and lower forms, more mindful, with more integrity, more self-knowledge, forms of polyamory, monogamy, and novogamy. And there is other forms that can also be more hypocritical or more dishonest, and so forth.
Yeah. So if you were going to break Novogamy down into 5 steps, if people were like, listening, this sounds quite cool. I want to experiment with this. What would be 5 steps to practicing or experimenting with Novogamy?
Well, it's not so much a practice. This is it's a good question. It's a
Okay.
good question, but
Philosophy.
I'm not sure it's a question I can respond in the sense that I wouldn't say it's a practice. It's a question of self knowledge, and then from that kind of self knowledge, then it's a question also of self identity. In the sense that it can be a liberating for many people reading my book. There's nothing better for an author that when unknown people who don't know you, they write you letters and they tell you, "Thank you so much. Reading your book has been so liberating," right? That makes all the work worth, right? So I had many letters like that from my last book, Love and Freedom, from people saying, I read your book and I was always struggling. I would fitting myself in one of these boxes, being monogamous or polyamorous, and your book gave me like this greater freedom to really be myself and be myself according to the circumstances, and know that that can change over time, or can change in different countries, or can change with different partners, and so forth. So that's what I would say. There is not formula or step-to-step practice.
Yeah,
Yes.
what you were saying is it's not a process, it's a sort of idea. It's a vision and it's an idea. Novogamy is an idea to kind of let marinate in the imagination and ponder at
Yes.
different stages
And
in
it
relationship with
yes.
the
And
self and in relationship with others.
yes, and it can manifest in a variety of ways, not only with like, with other human beings. It can manifest, like today we live in a highly technological, culture. So there is some people today that in real life they're monogamously married, but in the cyberspace, they have avatars. And they can be like having romantic, even sensuous conversations with different people in the cyberspace, and vice versa. I don't know if you know about lucid dreaming. Lucid dreaming, when people can be awake during the dream state. Yes. So I met, I had a colleague at the university in California, and he and his wife were both lucid dreamers. And when they got married monogamously, they had to clarify, does this agreement reach the dream world? Because in the dream world, they have been able to have like sensuous, even sexual experiences in the dream world. And one of them said, yes, we shouldn't do that in the dream world. And the other say, no, the dream world is the dream world. Come on. And I had to go to couple therapy.
Oh, no way. They thought that it was cheating if they had a sensual experience in their dreams.
One of them.
Wow. Surely in the dreamscape anything can happen. Isn't that like kind of generally understood? When you're dreaming, it's all your subconscious. It's not your conscious mind that's doing anything, maybe. Um, Next card is spirituality. What do you feel is the relationship between spirituality and sexuality?
Well, for
And
me,
how did your interests evolve from spirituality to sexuality?
for me, that has always been quite connected, spirituality and sexuality, because I experience sexuality as emerging from the energy of life. And the energy of life for me is sacred, right? We value life as sacred. The energy of sexuality is the very energy that creates life. It's through a sexual act that you were born into the world, Giada, and myself and any other persons, except if they go through some kind of like technological process, right? So for most people, it's that way. So I never understood why something so sacred as sexuality. Many of the traditions and many of the religions or cultural groups, they would say it's something almost the opposite that the sacred and the spiritual, almost something even dirty, something to be ashamed of, you know. So it's very, for me, it was always very sad. So it's our origin. If we don't respect our origin, what can we respect? If we don't trust our origin, what can we trust in life, right? So for me, sexuality, and of course, during sexual experience, you can also have many spiritual experiences. Even many secular individuals, and there is research on this, when they have like high peaks of sexual pleasure, they say, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God," or Jesus, or they stress religious words because why? Because it's the words that in their unconscious are associated to transcendence. Okay, sexual experience, sexual pleasure, orgasm as well are transcending experiences, and the communion with another human being in sexual experience that is shared is also a transcending experience. So of course it's connected to our spirituality. And this is part of the work I've been doing for many years in my teaching, in my many of the workshops, like to really help people to connect, to heal that dissociation that is historical and is still kind of like constrains many people's lives in very sad and tragic ways.
Yeah, maybe you could go into disassociation a bit because I don't know if everyone will know what that means.
Yes, when two entities are dissociated means that they are kind of like a split within oneself. If I go to the spiritual, I go to a meditation, I do practice there, but then I cut myself from my sensuality and my sexuality. If I go sexual, I go into a sexuality that is perhaps more instinctive, although instinctive sexuality can also lead to certain spiritual states, of course, more Dionysian states. But for more people, sexuality is something that they compartmentalize. The spirituality is what I go, where I do what I go to church, to service, when I go to meditation, to a workshop, but not when I am having sex with my wife or with my lover or with my sweetheart. So that's a compartmentalization, kind of a dissociation. And that's very sad. And also in our culture, it's very tragic too, because many young generations are learning that dissociation because they are learning about sexuality through watching pornography, right? This is like a big issue as well. And pornography, as is very patriarchal pornography on the one hand, and the kind of pornography that many young people are watching is a pornography that is really devoid of meaningfulness, devoid of connection, devoid of deep intimacy, and therefore devoid of that kind of transcendence I was speaking to. So that dissociation is still working through culture in major ways, in a variety of ways.
Yeah, thank you for explaining disassociation and your interest in spirituality and sexuality and how there's such a strong relationship between the two. And hopefully, as we evolve as humans, it becomes less taboo, less hidden. This idea that it's still kind of something that people feel uncomfortable to talk about is sad, as you
Yes,
say, life energy. So
yes.
my next word for you is intimacy. Can you discuss the different dimensions of intimacy
Mhm.
and how to design satisfying intimate relationships or greater intimacy in existing relationships?
Okay, that's a big question. I would say yes. I would say there
It
is
is.
different,
Three
different, different.
questions in one.
There are different types of intimacy, or I would say frequencies of intimacy. Of course, there is like a sexual intimacy, like involving sensuality and exchange of physical affection and pleasure. But there is also a more sensuous and affectionate emotional intimacy that could be sensuous, could be like coming together with your partner or like your lover or whatever, and engage into some kind of like contact, but that doesn't have to lead to sexuality. This is very important. This is something I recommend very much to couples I work with to enhance their intimacy, because very often they feel that if they get kind of intimate to each other, that it has to lead to sexuality. Why? It doesn't have to. To go into and it's something that could be then programmed and agreed upon. For example, let's have like a time, like once a week, in which we really encounter each other, and we are together physically and emotionally, caressing each other. Beautiful music, incense, like a glass of wine if you drink, and so forth. But we agree that we are not going into sexual intercourse or kind of like sexual activity. That's bonding. That helps with the bonding of the relationship, and also can even arise errors for the week. Desire will be enhanced later. This is very good for couples that have been together for a long time, and then their sexual desire has been lowered. To engage in those places enhances intimacy and bonding, and also enhances sexual. Afterwards. And I would say also there is a spiritual intimacy.
Spiritual intimacy. Yeah.
Yes, spiritual intimacy in which you can share with another human being. Doesn't have to be your partner. Like deep spiritual experiences that really touch your heart, experiences that transform your life, experiences that actually were the most important experiences you have had, and uh, be listen empathically, and then the other person can also share with you. This is what happens sometimes in certain workshops or certain environments, and that creates a sense of a spiritual intimacy. Also could be happen in couples, but also could happen with friends or even with strangers as well.
Intimacy with strangers. Is that what you were just saying?
I was referring to a spiritual intimacy, spiritual intimacy, that kind of like sharing of deep spiritual experiences, that it could be with someone that you just met in a workshop, in which there is like a safe container for that kind of deep sharing.
Yeah. How would you define intimacy? What would you say it means? Your
Intimacy, I would
definition.
say, my minimalist definition is closeness,
Closeness.
a
Yeah.
sense of closeness, a sense of
Which is what
closeness that
everybody wants.
ultimately, yes, that's what everybody wants, everybody needs, and we go uh, to try to get that in the most bizarre ways, in ways that sometimes backfire. Like, for example, trying to show up ourselves, trying to talk about our achievements, like we do things sometimes that actually push people away from us because they think we're narcissists, or like self-referential, whatever. But ultimately what we want is to be loved, to feel people that are close to us and feel that sense of deep closeness.
So, would narcissism be the opposite of closeness and intimacy? I think you need
uh,
to say something about narcissism because it's a word that's like it's entered popular culture. I feel like I didn't know that word growing up. I didn't know that word in my 20s. I wish I had. Um, it's something that people are using a lot now, and it seems to be a really dark energy that is damaging relationships and
yes, yes,
destroying intimacy. And
yes,
what
yes,
is, you want to say, what is narcissism?
sure. I would say in a deep way, narcissism is the opposite of self-realization. Um, when you are self-actualized, self-realized, there is less need for you to try to get external validation, constant external validation about who you are, to be admired, to be like put in a pedestal. That's what narcissistic behavior is searching for, to get attention from other people, but it backfires normally because it pulls people away. So that's an important piece. And of course, it's important to differentiate here between narcissistic tendencies that we all have at times, and they are normal, from a narcissist personality disorder, like someone who have like some kind of trauma. For example, their mom was abandoned him when he was in an early age, or their primary caregivers didn't give him like enough love and validation as a kid, and then they spend the rest of their lives trying to get that validation, that kind of like mirroring that they needed for their development. So of course, the problem in relationships is that
Okay, so narcissism uh, comes from abandonment.
in many ways there's always like a trauma. In most cases, there's like a trauma by omission of love and care from primary caregivers. Yes, and of course, in relationships, that becomes really challenging because the narcissistic person is sometimes can become like especially in the case of men, but also women, like the typical narcissist charmer, like someone who is like, like super charming, and like at some point is like showing with gifts and like compliments, and is very seductive, and women kind of like fall for them, but then at some point they realize that it's not about them, that ultimately they do all that just to feel the love back. They don't really care that much about the other person.
Sensual celibacy. Okay, so you have described a period of your life in this way. Would you encourage people to explore celibacy after a long relationship? And yeah, there's another question, but I'll just leave you with that one first. I'm going to ask you three.
Okay.
Yeah. Sensual
um,
celibacy. What is
yes.
it? And would you encourage people to be celibate after a long relationship?
Okay, I will explain how it emerged in my own trajectory. In my own trajectory, it was not like a mental decision, I'm going to be celibate. It happened after some years of a lot of relational sexual experimentation in the Bay Area of California. And at some point, I felt like that my own sexual energies wanted to go inwards. So it was like a more energetic process that of going inwards, and I didn't feel like wanting to be sexual with anyone. It lasted almost 3 years. It was a highly erotic time of my life because your whole body gets more erotic, life becomes more erotic, and uh, and then later when I reopened myself organically into sexuality, I found myself that my sexual constitution had changed in a way. My sexuality was much more full body. There was far less compulsion or no compulsion to orgasm or and so forth. So for me, it was like a highly also spiritual process of reorganization of my energies. That said, that's not something I recommend to everybody, because for me, it's something that happened organically. When you make that choice from your mind, okay, it's dangerous because you could make that choice for your mind. Oh, I'm going to be a spiritual person. I'm going to be celibate here, and then you can create like a struggle with your own sexual energies that want something else, and then you start creating like an inner struggle within yourself, and that can lead to repression, that can lead to problems in your sexual development. So on the other hand, the last thing I will say about this is that after a long-term relationship, it is not a bad idea to give oneself some time, doesn't mean that you have to become celibate. You can still experience sexuality with yourself, self-love as a ritual act of self-love and sensuality, But it's not a bad idea to not jump from one relationship to the other, Give yourself time to grieve, to honor that relationship, to honor what has been given to you, and create solid foundations. Learn what hasn't been working in that relationship within yourself, by yourself, or with the help of a therapist, and create a more solid foundation for your next relationship. Learn the skills like leak and heal your wounds, and then move into perhaps what could be a more satisfying relationship next time you mate.
Yeah, that sounds very wise. Rather than jumping into a new relationship as a way to avoid feeling the grief. Grief,
Yes,
it sounds like an important part of the process. Um, Boundaries, next word. Why are they important in relationships? How can we communicate them in a way that brings us closer together and doesn't push us further away from each other?
good. Um, this is a tricky question because what is a boundary for one person in a diet, in a partnership, could be felt a restriction for the other person. Or imagine that my boundary is that my boundary is that my partner cannot go for dinner with anyone of the opposite gender. Okay, and this happens in real life, right? I've seen that a lot, and I hear that a lot in my in my professional practice. And that in a way could be also be experienced as like a, it's like a um, mm, as an obstruction of the autonomy of and the dignity of the other person to have friendships, healthy, wholesome friendships of the opposite gender, right? So this is very tricky. We need to go, what kind of boundaries are we talking about? But in any case, what I would always recommend to my clients and also to my friends and to myself, if it comes to that, is to always share your boundaries in connection to your needs, and from a vulnerable place. We go back to full circle to the question of identifying your needs. It's very different that to say like, listen, I just don't want to go with dinner with Jim, or with James, because I think it's wrong with married women to have dinners with men. That if I tell my partner like, listen, whenever you go for dinner with another man, I feel insecure, I feel vulnerable. Maybe you can do something about it. Maybe when you come back from that dinner, you can embrace me and tell me that you love me and give me like a long hug. Maybe I can do something about it. Maybe when you go to those dinners, I can get myself a massage, so not to be at home like thinking what you are doing or not doing. Be creative about that, and that's also what very often couple therapists we do. We give ideas, creative ideas for people to try and see what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, and it sounds like in that framework, people need to really normalize talking about these things. A lot of people don't. A lot of people don't create space to have these types of conversations. So I feel like the next word that I'm going to put out there, it's not on a card, but is vulnerability.
Yes,
Like, can you say something about vulnerability in relationships? Because that's what's coming to mind here. Like,
yes,
what sounds quite normal from what you're describing
yes.
doesn't exist in every relationship.
Yes, this is super important. I'm glad that you brought that up because so often in this kind of patriarchal culture, especially for men, but also for many women, but especially for men, they associate to be vulnerable with being weak, right? And most men, conditioned by the macho uh, values, the machist values, the patriarchal values, they don't want to see weak. That they think that's like a shortcoming. They feel that that's going to make them feel less attractive in the eyes of women. But that's not my experience and the experience of most women I've talked with. Actually, on the one hand, when a man is really vulnerable about their insecurities or their needs, most women really open their hearts to them, and they allow them also to be vulnerable with them, and that creates a sense of closeness and intimacy. On the other hand, in my own experience and the experience of people I've seen in workshops, in experiential retreats I offer, when men start becoming vulnerable, they realize that vulnerability and its expression is the source of true empowerment. Otherwise, it's like a more superficial, macho style power that is hiding, is compensating for insecurities. But when those insecurities are being in the open, then and from that openness, I can really start connecting to my real source of power, a power that is not about dominating others. It's about feeling empowered by my own resources, energetic resources, and the capability to empower others as well.
Great description of vulnerability. Sounds like a very important key in relationships, the willingness to be vulnerable.
Yes.
And consent, that's the next word I've got here. Why is it important? Why are we not taught about it when we're younger? And what do people need to know about consent in relationship to sexuality?
Very good. Um, I think like times have are changing in that way, and today like consent is becoming like more something that is being talked about in culture. You know, especially with a lot of these situations of like sexual harassment and sexual abuse. You know, so I think it's been much more talked about than before. You know, but there is a lot of confusion here, and there is a lot of like um, on the one hand, this is creating a situation in which many men feel insecure now to approach a woman because they feel afraid that they're going to be accused of sexual harassment. And many women that I know are complaining, well, guys now they don't approach me, they don't take the initiative, they're afraid, you know. So it's this sort of confusion. We're giving baby steps to change this paradigm, like to be able to still be a man, be a woman, take sexual initiatives, but still with respect and awareness of boundaries, right? And so forth. On the other hand, like on a sexual level, it's super important, like that when people come together, you know, they do have like some clear conversations about what they want, what they don't want, what are their limits, and so forth. But at the same time, they can be creative with that because, for example, some people say, well, the word no, you know, the word no means stop, you know, but maybe for a couple, maybe she gets on when she's saying no, no, no in a sexual situation with their partner because it's a safe environment, and he gets on as well. So in those situations, I tell my clients, well, find a different word, you know, Spider-Man could be. Use the word Spider-Man when you want something to stop. Well, that's not cool, you know, but allow yourself to say no or fuck off or whatever, you know, if that's turning you on and you want to continue in that kind of exploration, you know. So you need to be creative with consent, with boundaries, with the language that we use. And also I want to emphasize again, there is a lot of confusion in our culture that will take a different whole podcast to go deep into it.
Absolutely. But on the topic of a safe word, which is basically Spider Man right now, the next card is fetish and kink. So, where do fetishes and kinks come from? And can they be therapeutic or healing?
I would say yes and no. It really depends. It really depends. It really depends how they are approached. This comes back to that consideration at the beginning of the podcast about like approaching relationships and approaching sexuality as an area of personal growth and healing or not. For example, I know many people who are in the SBD community, like masochistic, sadomasochistic communities, you know, that they are very aware that they are doing some healing work there. Maybe they were like sexually abused, for example. That's the worst that can happen to a kid or an adolescent, right? And then from an adult perspective, in a very protected environment with very clear boundaries, they are going to go gradually there, being able to put limits and boundaries to go there and heal that situation very consciously. In that case, that exploration could be very healing to go there in that mindful context. But unfortunately, many people also have seen that they go into kink and then they go into loops. They never heal because they don't have like that consciousness, and they get kind of like in a way like addicted to certain experiences. And when addiction happens, is because there is a desire to go to some place that deep down you know is going to be healing, but you never get there. You never get there. You never get there. And then you go all your life into loops. I'm simplifying this tremendously, But I would say that there is something to that, really depending on how you approach the practice, the kink or the fetish, and so forth.
What do you think? What does kink mean actually, in the context of sexuality and relationships?
Well, kink normally has been used for practices that are so-called taboo, practices that are uncomfortable for most normal people. You know, because like this thing, we normal people we don't do kink, and then there's like the kinky people that they do kink. You know, so normally having practices that has been somehow repressed historically, culturally, like sadomasochism, for example, right, or fetishism, or domination and things like that, you know, or cross-dressing on things like this. So, but again, like for me, like what counts is not the unusualness of the practice, but its fruits. You know, is this practice something that is giving you some self-knowledge, some growth, some healing? Or is this practice that something that's actually bringing you into a spiral of self-destruction, or kind of a self-diminishing of your potentials? Or are you falling into something that is really not good for you and your life? That should be the dividing line. And of course there is always exceptions, of course, like not hurting, of course, unless it's kind of consensual and limited. And of course, like the other huge one is like not engaging in sexuality with minors, with children. And these are like two huge ones, that should be always respected and honored. That's another big tragedy of our time, that I think is connected to that split that we talked at the beginning between sexuality and spirituality. It's not surprising that there has been so many sexual scandals in the church, in people who are supposedly very spiritual, but also not only in the church, but also Tibetan lamas or shamans, or yoga instructors. So many people who are into the spiritual world, they have split themselves from their sexuality, and then that creates a stagnation in their own sexual life, and makes them like feeling drawn to children or minors, because they embody a referent of sexual purity, and that's where they need to find themselves, within themselves, not outside. That's another whole huge topic of conversation, of course. But what they need is healing. A lot of what they are called perversions, or even like many of the people who think what they're criminals or they're doing something really bad, what they need is deep healing, not punishment.
Yep, that's healing, healing. Um, and relationships as a vehicle for healing. Would you say that relationships can be deeply healing?
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely, yes. Relationships, I would say it is one of the most um, one of the most important arenas of our lives in which we can do deep healing. Why? Because most of our deepest wounding happen in intimate situation with our primary caregivers, or our siblings, or like people that we felt really intimately very close with. Okay, so it's only in situations of deep intimacy that you can become aware of those wounds, and also you can heal them. But sometimes, again, like that sometimes is possible, that happen organically, spontaneously in our relationships. Sometimes you may need like the support and the guidance of like a couple therapist, or like someone who can be there, like helping you to do that kind of healing together.
Yes. Okay, so we're down to the last 5 minutes, so I have to quick fire some
Okay,
questions at you, if that's okay.
that's okay.
I'm going to ask you things quickly, and yeah, okay. So conscious dating. What advice would you give for those out there listening who want to date consciously?
Okay. Self-knowledge about what you need and want, and express that very clearly and loudly at the beginning of your dates. It's very important.
Participatory theory. This is something you developed in your book on human spirituality. Please explain the idea of participatory theory.
Okay, participatory spirituality is about co-creation, that we co-create our spiritual life with everything that we have, including our body, our
Yeah.
sexuality, our heart, our mind, and consciousness.
To me, it sounds like co-creating with the magical energy of life.
Well, it's also that's the transpersonal co-creation that you are co-creating with a series of options that emerge from that connection of the energy of life. We'll have these potentials, and the energy of life is the creative energy of life flowing through us. And I would say that's like a spiritual energy in its most creative manifestation. So yes, it's also co-creating what I call the mystery, that kind of creative process of unfolding of creative power that also led, from maybe the Big Bang or even before to the unfolding of the stars, the galaxies, life on planet Earth. We're participatory agents in all these lives. We can co-create with that energy our spiritual life as well.
I love it. I love it. I just feel so uplifted when you're describing that we all are participating in life and the infinite possibilities and magic that are accessible to all of us. It makes me, yeah, feel very uplifted hearing you describe participatory theory. So I'm all for it. I think we will end with transpersonal psychology. What is it? And this is your particular type of psychology. You're a pioneer and a champion of the second wave of transpersonal psychology. I did find that. Tell me about transpersonal psychology, please.
Okay, transpersonal psychology is a psychology of the whole person, including the spiritual dimension. So it's psychology that considers the spiritual dimension as being also as fundamental as our minds, our hearts and emotions, and so forth. And it's a psychology that is very integrative. It integrates like the knowledge of all the Western psychological traditions, all the scientific knowledge of Western psychology, with the wisdom of the contemplative and indigenous traditions of the world. So in a way, we're here integrating all of the different ways of knowing that shape us, not only mental, rational, but also emotional, spiritual intelligence, and so forth, in our growth, in our self-understanding, but also all that kind of greater canvas of knowledge and wisdom. And finally, it's a psychology of transformation. It's not just a psychology of like finding about who you are, what typology you are, or what are my issues or neuroses. It's a psychology of deep transformation, and it has like high hopes for human transformation. It's a much more optimistic psychology, so to speak.
Yeah, I can even hear it, the energy when you describe it. When you describe participatory theory and transpersonal psychology, the energy is going up, and it's a great note to end on. So, before we conclude this episode, if people want to find out more and get in touch with you, do you have a website you can
And
shout out?
yes, the website is Jorge N, like in Nancy, Ferrer. Maybe you can also write that down later in the text for the episode. But it's
I will. I will share it.
JORGEN, like in
Yes.
Nancy Ferrer.com. And they can find about my background, my services, and everything is there. Thank you very much.
Amazing. And the last card is a wild card. Is there anything you want to say before we go? Wild card.
I would say, like, especially in the realms of relationships, be very compassionate with yourself and others. Uh, we are all giving baby steps in trying to find new paradigms of relating, and we need to understand that the way we learn as human beings is to trial and error in any arena of life. So it's important that we are especially compassionate with ourselves, with our mistakes, with our partner's mistakes as we grow together, and we forgive, we really like bring this kind of a compassionate gaze to ourselves and others.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a beautiful idea to leave me with. So, this concludes our episode of the Light Conversations. And thank you so much, Jorge, for being my guest today from afar. And it's been really insightful hearing what you have to say on all of these topics, and I can't wait to watch back through what we've discussed today and share this with people out there.
Thank you
You
very
are
much.
wonderful. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you very much, Giada.
time to
Thank you,
talk to me.
everybody who listens to this. I hope it has been somehow of value for all of you, and thank you for the wild card approach. It makes it really fun and dynamic.